Well, I have to say it's pretty fascinating for me to have gone in the last 30 years from being a fringe element hippie to being a rock star. Because we're organic farming. I mean, when we started out, actually I went to University of Illinois and studied biology, and I graduated in '76. And right after that, started working for an organic community garden because I wasn't so interested in being in the lab. I liked the lab, but I wanted to be outside. And it turned out to be a perfect fit, just dealing with all of the horticultural items that we were dealing with in the community garden. And then I started a small production garden and quickly decided I had no idea what I was doing. And so after the truck failed and the irrigation failed and the sales failed, I decided I wanted to go out to California and get some training. So I'm going to start from there just to kind of give you a picture of the type of background I have, because I think if everybody in here, and I'm assuming most of you guys are already going to farmers markets, you're probably selling a diversity of crops, you're trying to figure out where to sell your product, you're trying to figure out how to focus on the things that make the most money. I'm assuming that's why you're here. If you're going to come in and listen to a whole presentation on growing cut flowers and on record keeping, you're already involved in trying to grow specialty crops and make as much money as you can. But each one of us, when we come into this, no matter where we have come from, whether it's from a different profession or if you're just getting into it, if you were to close your eyes and imagine the type of influences that you have had that have brought you to this point of wanting to do small farming. Everybody has a different imagination about what was it? Was it gardening with your grandparents when you were a kid? Was it going to a farmer's market and being inspired by somebody there? And we have different ideas of what small farming looks like. And so I just want to take you on a brief tour of the type of influences I had when I was in my late 20s and I moved to California to study with this guy, Alan Chadwick, who had started a big project at the University of California. Actually, it started small and it became large, and it's now the oldest organic training center in the U.S. It's been in place since 1976, and I was there in, 76. I was there in 67, excuse me. I was there in 78. So when we dim the lights just a little bit, and I'm going to have to stand up here near the computer since they don't have something I can point. So this will be my 31st year this coming summer of being on a farmer's market and being at this piece of land in the Ozarks. We're way up in the northwest corner, about 30 miles south of the Missouri border and an hour east of the Oklahoma border, so very far up in the northwest corner. If anybody's ever been to Fayetteville or to Eureka Springs, I'm about half an hour south of Eureka Springs. Fayetteville is about an hour from the farm. So this is where I got my early inspiration after I had already tried a little bit of small farming and everything fell apart because I didn't know what I was doing. I moved out to California to study with this guy, Alan Chadwick. Now, this is not when I was in my 20s. This was just a few years ago when I went back there for a reunion. This program is called the UCSC Farm and Garden Project. It's now part of the Center for Agroecology in Santa Cruz at the University of California. But when Alan Chadwick first came, this guy, when he first came there, they had invited him to start a garden at the university. It was a new university. And some woman said, I know exactly who we need for this project. Turned out to be this very eccentric, formerly rich English aristocrat who had studied all over Europe in English and French horticultural techniques. And that was his background, and that's what he brought to this project. But the project was so fascinating that kids started dropping out of school to study with him, and the university had a problem on its hands because they didn't know what to do with this project. They had invited this guy to come start this garden, and all these people were dropping out of school to work with him because he was such a fascinating character. And the reason it was fascinating was because it was something that people hadn't seen before. When you get somebody creating 3 to 10 acres of intensive horticultural gardens like you might see at some big estate in North England somewhere, and you transplant it into the U.S., it's fascinating. And the kids were fascinating, and he had been a Shakespearean actor for about 30 years, so he had this very eloquent way of presenting everything. But from the beginning, what we were exposed to was this highly diversified set of plants, including vegetables, all kinds of specialty vegetables and cut flowers, culinary herbs, different types of fruit trees. And of course in Santa Cruz you can grow almost everything. But from the very beginning, at this project, we were exposed to an incredible amount of diversity, and at the time I was there, it was all hand done. This is a 3-acre original site, which quickly expanded about 5 years later to a 17-acre site. And by the time I was there in '78, they had finally started to use some small tractors. But part of this aesthetic, and I have to call it a type of aesthetic, is that it was completely organic. That was also fascinating to a lot of us who were in the early part of the environmental movement. Ecology was just beginning to be a science in the early '70s when I was at the university. And it wasn't until much later that the university's scientists started using this type of situation to study the different interactions between the insects, between the plants. That, of course, became what's known now as the science of agroecology. But what didn't even exist at the point when this garden went in. So fast forward 30 years to our place, Dripping Springs Garden in Northwest Arkansas, you can see that there's a relationship between this situation and that situation. People will come out to the farm and they say, how in the world did you ever get started doing this? How did you start growing cut flowers and all these vegetables? Well, it wasn't just because I had a dream and I just dreamed it up one night and we started doing it. It's the result of many, many long years of following the same type of aesthetic that I was exposed to when I was in my 20s. And I'm 60, almost 61 now, so it's been a long time in development. This is my farming partner, Michael, who is sort of a garden elf, and if anything, if I can wish you anything in your farming endeavors, is to have someone associated with you that loves it just as much as you do. So here is an aerial photo from about, I think it said 600 feet of our situation. What happened is that we found this 40-acre piece of property that had an abandoned blueberry farm on it. This was back in 1984. And what sold me on it, of course, was this beautiful creek running at the bottom, because having lived in California where everything had to be irrigated all summer long, even though I was originally from Mississippi and born in Baton Rouge, then lived in Illinois before I moved to California. But living in California inoculated me with this idea that we had to have a really secure source of water, and that everything that we had, especially here in Northwest Arkansas, had to be on drip irrigation. We had to have a year-round supply of water. So that was a big part of picking this property. Up in the Ozarks, we have really generally rocky soils. And in this area, in my county, we have cherty soils, really a gravelly silt loam. And so we don't have anything like the type of soils y'all have down here. You're very lucky to actually have some soil. We have a lot of rocks, but it grows things very well. So you can see this top part was all blueberry field when we first got there. And that's why the rows are all going slightly up and down the hill. We got a couple of unheated hoop houses, large ones at the top. To the right, over in the corner, you can see that's a propagation greenhouse that's heated, and then a barn below it. This is the main house down here. There are a couple of greenhouses over here now. These are the first two smaller unheated hoop houses that we started with. Everything in the rest of the field is all in contour because we're on a slope. And we use the contour arrangement to help both catch water and to shed it when we need to. That's what it looks like. The lower field looks like in the summertime. So it's all in the beds. These are 4-foot wide beds separated by about 18-inch paths. This is basically was inspired by the gardens that I worked with in California, but it's turned out to be a great way to grow the specialty crops that we grow. It's a good organization tool. Of course, if you have large spaces and large open fields, that's going to depend on the type of crops you're growing, whether you want to use beds or not. Everything we grow is in beds. Here's what we're doing at the farmer's market. So I can get out here and see this a little bit better for you. The aesthetic of the garden is carried directly to the farmer's market. We want people, when they come to the farmer's market, to taste a little bit of what our lifestyle tastes like, and they do. And I feel like this is a really important point to remember when you're at a farmer's market dealing with the public, is that You cannot expect to develop a core following of devoted people if all you offer them is some bland scene of sitting on the back of a pickup truck with some watermelons or some cantaloupes. You have to create what my friend Ellen Polishuk calls a situation. She said if she's going to grow herbs in her farm, she's going to create a herb situation at the farmer's market. We want people to stop and be totally sidetracked from whatever they were doing when they go by our stand, because we want to have a conversation with them, we want to get to know them. And then over 30 years, of course, we've developed a really good business in Fayetteville, even though at the time when we started growing, we had a card table full of bok choy and maybe a couple of gladiolas. That's how we started. And over the years, it's developed to a very profitable market for us. And cut flowers have been part of that. That last scene was more in the middle of the summertime, probably in July. And you can see we have vegetables out front now because of I'll explain this a little bit later tonight too when I'm talking about marketing, but because we have a lot of very good vegetable growers on our market, a lot of the produce that we grow is not displayed here. It's sold through a CSA and to a wholesale account at a health food store. So every marketing situation we're continually playing the market to see what sells best where, and so cut flowers for us probably account for about 75% of our sales at the farmer's market, and the vegetables are moved there but also elsewhere. This is one of the very first markets in the spring when actually this is probably in about middle of April when we start to have tulips, anemones. We've got lots of greens from the hoop houses and some from outside. And this would be more in the middle of the summer once almost everything in the field has started coming on. I'm just trying to give you an idea. I saw this guy at I was getting a tire fix at a filling station. This guy pulled up to get another tire changed, and I thought maybe that's what my retirement might look like. All plastic flowers. This is what it's like to live in the Ozarks. There's a lot of characters up there. So we're going to focus on flower production here for the next hour or so. And this PowerPoint, I believe, is going to be available for you on Gary's website. And then they're also filming this, so you can take a look at these. I think over many years, probably especially the first 10 years of growing cut flowers for farmers market, we probably grew many, many, many more species than we grow now. And through this process of winnowing out what really does well, we've come up with this. Of course, we always add a few things every year and tweak the varieties a little bit, but these 2 pages of cut flower, I think there's about 60 different species, have been the most productive for us, and I would guess that many of these will do well in central Louisiana. A lot of new growers make the mistake of trying to grow too many different things, and because they don't know actually yet what produces the best for them and what's the most popular with the public. We find it's better to kind of narrow down to what really does well and grow lots and lots of it, because we want a lot of sales. One of the a critical component of cut flower production is having your own propagation facility. So how many of you are growing your own transplants? And the rest of you, where do you get them? Do you buy transplants? Do you direct seed? Don't have them. If you don't have a propagation greenhouse and you want to do something like cut flowers, and also actually for vegetables too, you need some place to have a propagation area that's heated, where you can control the climate. I'm going to go through just some of the aspects of this. This is one of the first greenhouses that we built. It was wood heated for 30 years until this winter. And we finally got so tired of the wood project that we put a gas heater in here. It was fine to have wood heat, but it was also a lot of work. I slept in here in the springtime for many years, actually, in the early years. But you can see it's a double poly greenhouse, 30 by 80 feet long. It can produce 40, 50, 60,000 transplants during the springtime. In the summertime, we use it for some specialty crop production like ginger. In the wintertime, it's just starting to get full now. We're using all layers of it. We use hanging baskets. We have these benches were made out of just pipe and cattle panel. Very simple way to make some benches that the mice can't climb up the pipe, and then also because we got cattle panel on there, once the flats are removed, we can grow stuff in the boxes underneath. We can grow, yeah.
Anybody need something to take notes on? I didn't think about that.
And if anybody has any questions at any point, we have plenty of time this morning, so please go ahead and raise them as they come up.
Notes?
I wanted to ask if you sell to commercial florists.
We do.
Did they help you develop your production list?
No. They're really a sideline market for us. So we have a couple of florists that are right off the square where the market is. Actually, one of them worked for us for a year before she had her flower business. And both of them come to the market and buy from us. So what we've avoided, what we have to avoid is driving around town because we're already so busy with market. So everything we can, if we can get florists to come to us rather than having to drive to them, it's a lot better arrangement for us.
Do you have roll-up sides, or are you using a wet cool moist pad system?
Do we have what?
Roll-up sides or less cool system?
This greenhouse doesn't have roll-up sides. It's the only one that we don't have roll-up sides on because our winters are real cold. So in the summertime, we're venting. Actually, now that wall has 3 large commercial greenhouse fans that can keep it down in the high 80s. And we have an evaporative cooler system that we haven't installed yet. It's going on this other wall. So before this past summer, before those fans went in, we basically did not use this greenhouse in the summertime. It was too hot. But once we put the fans in, we were actually able to grow stuff in there, and we haven't even put the evaporative cooling in yet. But yeah, because of our winters, you know, we can have 20 below zero. We want it to stay at least above 40 in here. And when I get home, I'll probably bump it up to about 50 because we want things to start growing faster. But in the wintertime, we don't try to heat it to where we have to grow anything that's we wouldn't try to grow tomatoes out of season or something like this in this house. It's just too expensive for us. But for most of these spring vegetables, we'll be direct seeding spinach and lettuces, broccoli, cabbage, kale, all that kind of stuff when I get back. 45 to 50 degree minimum temperature is fine. So this is what this same greenhouse looks like in mid-April. You can see it's just stuffed, and there's several things going on in there. On the right-hand side of the table, actually in the center, and this, and the far side are transplants that are getting ready to go out in the field. On the floor are crates of lilies, and I'll talk about lily production in a minute. And then on the other side are actually in the ground beds of snapdragons. Because this one greenhouse is heated, we can bring off some flowers earlier for the very first markets, and snapdragons are a good candidate for that. These are snapdragons, those same snapdragons. These on the left-hand side, same ones before they started blooming. Those beds were actually built on top of landscape fabric. This greenhouse, the floor of it is landscape fabric. It doesn't have gravel in it. We were advised not to do that by a friend of ours who has a lot of greenhouses because he said soil falls into the gravel along with weed seeds and different things, and they end up having to weed the greenhouse all the time. So he suggested we just put down landscape fabric on the floor of the greenhouse, and it's worked really well. We have to start relining it with a new layer now, but we've been in there about 15 years, so it's actually worked very well. So these beds are actually built on top of landscape fabric with soil that was brought in with cedar lined 1x10s, lined with 1x10s, and then we can plant several different crops in there. Snapdragons are one we like to have early for market. We are certified organic by the state of Oklahoma. They're authorized to certify in Arkansas. And we're certified by them because they're inexpensive. It only costs us a couple $100 a year to certify, plus transportation for the certifying agent. But we do have to use organic mixes in the greenhouse. Mostly what we use is SunGrow's organic mix. They make a loose fill in a 2.5, a 2.2 and 2.8 cubic foot bag. We buy that by the pallet. that doesn't have any fertilizer in it, so then we amend it with commercial compost and feather meal or granulated chicken litter, and then we can subsequently fertilize it with fish emulsion. That pretty much does the trick. This is the type of chicken litter we were using for a long time. Granulated, was produced in Arkansas. We've changed distributors now because this plant was hit by a tornado, but this is a very convenient and low-cost organic fertilizer.